Qatargate Scandal, Europe, political bribery exposed in the heart of Brussels. Beneath the flags of democracy, a quiet scandal was about to shake the foundations of Europe itself. For decades, the European Parliament had stood as a symbol of integrity, a fortress of law, human rights, and order. But in December 2022, that image would shatter. It began with a tip, whispers of foreign money, secret favors, and suitcases filled with cash. What investigators found next would expose one of the most shocking cases of political corruption in modern European history. This was Qatargate, the hidden investigation. Months before the world heard the word Qatargate, Belgian intelligence had already been watching. Their anti-corruption unit, led by Judge Michel Claes, had traced unusual financial movements tied to a few Brussels-based NGOs. These organizations claimed to promote human rights, but the money trails told a different story. Unknown to most lawmakers, agents began quietly monitoring key offices, phone records, and hotel meetings. Every clue pointed to something bigger than lobbying. It was foreign interference happening inside the EU's own walls. The night of the raids, December 9th, 2022, it was a Friday evening when Belgian police moved in. 16 simultaneous raids across Brussels, apartments, offices, and even the homes of members of the European Parliament. The operation uncovered over 1.5 million euros in cash. Envelopes stuffed with 50 euros and 100 euro notes, hidden inside suitcases, wardrobes, and children's strollers. The photos released later looked surreal. Democracy's halls tainted by bags of cash. One of the first suspects arrested was Eva Kaili, a vice president of the European Parliament, along with her partner, Francesco Giorgi. By midnight, European politics was in crisis. The immediate fallout. Within 24 hours, Eva Kaili was stripped of her duties and expelled from her political party in Greece. Belgian prosecutors described the case as a major investigation into criminal organization, corruption, and money laundering. As word spread, the European Parliament scrambled to protect its image. President Roberta Metsola released a statement the next morning, vowing, "There will be no impunity. None." But behind closed doors, leaders feared the worst, that this was not just one person's crime, but a network financed and directed by foreign powers. The shock across Europe. Media outlets across Europe broke the story simultaneously. Le Soir called it the biggest corruption storm ever to hit the EU. In Italy, newspapers drew comparisons to Tangentopoli, the massive bribery scandal that brought down governments in the 1990s. In Brussels cafes and EU corridors, people whispered one question: if our parliament can be bought, who's really in control? The stage was set, the money was real, the suspects were in custody. But investigators still didn't know the full truth, who was paying and what they were buying. When Belgian police opened those suitcases of cash, they didn't just find money, they found a pattern. Names began to appear in seized documents, connecting politicians, NGOs, and lobbyists. It wasn't a random bribe. It was a system built by insiders who knew exactly how to move influence through Europe's highest corridors of power. At the center of it all were three key figures: Antonio Panzeri, Eva Kaili, and Francesco Giorgi, the core of what investigators later called the influence network. Antonio Panzeri, the architect, born in Lombardy, Italy, Antonio Panzeri was once a respected member of the European Parliament. He served from 2004 to 2019, first representing the Italian left, and later chairing the subcommittee on human rights, a position that gave him access to international diplomacy and lobbying channels. After leaving Parliament, he founded an NGO called Fight Impunity, publicly devoted to defending human rights and democratic values. But investigators discovered that Fight Impunity had become a front organization, allegedly used to launder money and buy influence for foreign clients. Panzeri had the connections, the reputation, and the perfect cover. Eva Kaili, the rising star. Eva Kaili was one of the European Parliament's youngest vice presidents. A Greek lawmaker known for her modern, progressive image, she often spoke about innovation, technology, and equality. But her political rise was shadowed by her partner, Francesco Giorgi, who worked closely with Panzeri. According to Belgian prosecutors, Kylie allegedly used her influence to speak positively about Qatar's labor reforms just before the 2022 World Cup, one of the very issues under investigation. When police raided her home, they found 150,000 euros in cash, hidden inside bags and strollers. Kylie denied wrongdoing, insisting she had no knowledge of the money, but the evidence told another story. Francesco Giorgi, the middleman, an aide to another MEP and a longtime Brussels insider. Francesco Giorgi acted as the link between Panzeri's network and those paying for influence. When questioned by investigators, he confessed to being part of the system, describing how money was funneled through NGOs and how key votes in parliament were quietly shaped. He claimed that both Qatar and Morocco were interested in promoting positive policies and public image within the EU. His testimony gave prosecutors the internal map they needed to follow the trail abroad. The NGOs, masks of legitimacy. At the center of the financial flow were two organizations. Fight Impunity, founded by Panzeri. No Peace Without Justice, an Italian-based NGO with overlapping contacts and funding channels. These groups were presented as humanitarian and policy-driven, but behind closed doors, they were allegedly used to receive and redistribute foreign funds. Investigators later uncovered transactions worth tens of thousands of euros, often disguised as donations or project support. The NGOs gave the entire operation a face of credibility, a disguise even experienced politicians trusted. The web expands. By early 2023, Belgian authorities had traced the network across multiple EU member states. Evidence showed that lobbyists and intermediaries arranged meetings between MEPs and foreign envoys. Some of these meetings were hosted in luxury hotels in Brussels and Strasbourg, far from public scrutiny. Through these sessions, speeches were influenced, committee reports were softened, and critical votes became favorable to foreign interests. It was lobbying turned into covert diplomacy, and Panzeri had designed it all. By the beginning of 2023, the investigation had crossed Europe's borders. Every path, every bank record, every confession led to one name: Qatar, a small but powerful Gulf nation. Qatar had spent years expanding its global influence through diplomacy, energy, and sport. But as the World Cup approached, European investigators found that Qatar's charm offensive may have included more than public relations. It may have included cash. Qatar's global strategy. For over a decade, Qatar had worked to strengthen its image as a modern, reform-driven state. Billions were invested in sports, education, and partnerships across Europe. The 2022 FIFA World Cup was the crown jewel of that effort, a symbol meant to show progress and legitimacy to the world. But with international criticism mounting over labor rights abuses, Qatar faced intense pressure from the European Union. According to prosecutors, this was when foreign funds began flowing quietly into Europe to soften public opinion and ensure favorable political outcomes. How the influence worked. Investigators discovered that money from Qatari intermediaries was allegedly routed through NGOs in Brussels. The NGOs then made donations, sponsored events, and organized conferences that praised Qatar's reforms. Certain MEPs were invited on all-expense-paid trips to Doha, where meetings were held with officials and diplomats. In return, these politicians spoke publicly in defense of Qatar, particularly regarding labor reforms for migrant workers. Parliamentary discussions that were once critical suddenly shifted to neutral or positive tones. The evidence trail. Belgian police and financial analysts tracked communications between Antonio Panzeri and several individuals linked to Qatar's diplomatic mission. Some of these exchanges referenced support for upcoming initiatives, language investigators interpreted as code for influence operations. Further evidence came from Francesco Giorgi's confession, where he admitted that Qatar had provided gifts and cash through Panzeri's network. Authorities also identified Morocco as another country involved in a similar pattern, though Qatar's role was the most direct and substantial. Diplomatic reactions. When the news broke, Qatar denied all accusations, calling them baseless and biased. The Qatari government stated that it had no involvement in any illegal activities and that its diplomatic contacts with EU officials were in line with international norms. Still, the scandal strained relations. In December 2022, the European Parliament froze all work on Qatar-related files, including visa and air transport agreements. What had begun as a corruption probe was now a full-blown diplomatic crisis. Impact on the European Union. Inside the European Parliament, members expressed outrage and shame. Some demanded stricter lobbying transparency and the registration of all third-country representatives. Others warned that foreign governments had found the EU's weak spot, its open access and lack of oversight on lobbying activities. The scandal revealed that the European Parliament, designed to safeguard democracy, had been quietly influenced from outside its borders. By early 2023, the Qatargate investigation had reached its breaking point. Arrests had been made, apartments searched, millions in cash seized. Now, investigators turned to the most powerful tool they had left, the confessions. The once solid alliance of influence brokers began to crumble from within. Those who had worked in silence for years started speaking, not to protect others, but to save themselves. Antonio Panzeri turns informant. In January 2023, former MEP Antonio Panzeri, the man at the heart of the scandal, struck a plea deal with Belgian prosecutors. Under the agreement, he admitted his role in the criminal organization and promised to reveal every detail, names, payments, and connections, in exchange for a reduced sentence. Panzeri's confession was explosive. He confirmed that money had been received from Qatar and Morocco, channeled through his NGO, Fight Impunity, and used to influence votes and public statements within the European Parliament. His testimony provided investigators with a full map of the network, from Brussels offices to diplomatic back channels in Doha and Rabat. The web unravels. Following Panzeri's confession, several figures faced renewed scrutiny. Francesco Giorgi, his former aide, corroborated key parts of the story, admitting he managed the cash flow and distributed funds among trusted parliamentarians. He described the network as an informal group aimed at promoting Qatar's and Morocco's interests within the EU. Meanwhile, Eva Kaili, the Greek vice president of the parliament, continued to claim innocence. Her defense argued that she was unaware of her partner Giorgi's actions, despite the 150,000 euros found in her apartment and her father being caught with another suitcase full of cash. Her arrest, however, had already become the public face of the scandal, symbolizing how deeply corruption had reached the heart of the EU. Judicial consequences. Belgian prosecutors filed charges against at least 6 individuals, including Panzeri, Kaili, Giorgi, and NGO associates. The charges: corruption, money laundering, participation in a criminal organization. The European Parliament swiftly moved to strip Eva Kaili of her vice presidency. It also froze all legislative work related to Qatar and tightened internal rules on lobbying transparency. Investigators seized over 1.5 million euros in cash, dozens of electronic devices, and bank documents proving the existence of unreported financial flows between EU-based NGOs and foreign entities. Political fallout in Europe. The scandal sent shockwaves through Brussels. European leaders condemned the corruption as a betrayal of Europe's values. Belgian Prime Minister Alexander De Croo described it as a wake-up call for the entire European Union. The case forced lawmakers to debate new transparency measures, including mandatory lobbying registers, gift disclosures, and strict oversight of all foreign-funded NGOs. In essence, Qatargate exposed how vulnerable European institutions had become to external influence, and how trust, once broken, would take years to rebuild. Public reaction. Across Europe, citizens demanded accountability. The story dominated headlines for weeks, sparking anger and cynicism about EU integrity. Hashtags like #Qatargate, #BrusselsBribes, and #EU corruption trended across social media, reflecting a crisis not just of governance, but of credibility. Even as trials continued into 2024, one truth remained. Qatargate wasn't only about money. It was about the erosion of trust in one of the world's most powerful democratic institutions. Epilogue: the cost of corruption. In the end, the briefcases were opened, the deals exposed, and the silence broken. Europe learned that corruption doesn't always come from the shadows. Sometimes it sits right at the table of democracy. Qatargate became a symbol of a new era, one where transparency, not secrecy, defines power. The investigation continues, but its legacy is already written. The European Parliament will never operate in the same